You may be seated. I always wanted to say that. So. As a teacher, most of my students just come in and sit down, so I never have to say, you may be seated. Man, I've really enjoyed my time here, and one of the things I've really been impressed by is that this group is a whole Bible group with Jesus at the center of that whole Bible. And man, that's a rare gift to be among people like that, so thank you. Dennis talked about that this morning, about the law, the prophets, and the writings, the whole Old Testament. Yesterday, Ben said, remember that Jesus is the Yahweh figure in the Old Testament most of the time, right? So when you think about the burning bush, or when you think about the angel of the Lord appearing, that's the second person of the Trinity. He's everywhere, right? He's been here the whole time, and we get to see that. And the way in which I grew up and the way in which I was taught, that connection was never made for me. And so to know that and to teach that and to pass it along to the next generation is huge. It really is. So today my task is to, in some sense, explain the message and the method of the Song of Songs. Right? You said you're a whole Bible church, so I'm going for it, right? It's in the canon. And I want to talk about it. And just to preface the material in the book, I just want to note this. The Song of Songs is a piece of wisdom literature that was originally written to train young women. So teenage girls, okay? So most of us are past that now. But almost all of you in here are teachers, and we need to know the message of this book and pass it along to the next generation, because its message, I think, is more relevant today than perhaps it's been in my entire life in terms of what marriage and the importance of marriage and the gift that it is. All right? Okay, so here we go. What then do you think about the Song of Songs when you think about it? Right? When was the last time you read it out loud to your children or grandchildren? Right? Those twin fawns, right? One early rabbi, Rabbi Akiva, who lived from approximately 50 to 135 AD, so really early on, famously wrote, "For all of the ages are not worth the day on which the Song of Songs was given to Israel. For all of the writings are holy, but the Song of Songs is the holy of holies," he said. I wonder if that's how most of us think about the Song of Songs when we encounter it. Or do we even think about it? Right? Or are we just kind of like, you know. Today we want to talk about the message and the theology of the Song of Songs, a book kind of hidden under the dust in the back of our Old Testaments. Though it has always appeared in our Bibles, we barely ever give it any attention in preaching or teaching, right? One scholar called the book functionally decanonized, right? That is, it's in our Bible, but we just ignore it. In some sense, like the book of Judges. But man, I was super impressed. I don't know how many of you came up and said, I was reading the book of Judges, or we were just studying the book of Judges. You don't hear that kind of language too often in the circles. And so I'm impressed. And so perhaps I'll hear about how many of you have been reading the Song of Songs lately. Okay. We basically recognize it for one, or we basically ignore it for one of two reasons. The first is we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to interpret it. Right? It's in some sense like the book of Revelation. It's like, what does it mean? Mm-hmm. And second, we may have a pretty good idea of what it means, but we're perhaps embarrassed or hesitate to talk about it in the context of the local church. Right? So I want to do two things this morning and then perhaps one this afternoon. I want to consider the message of the song. What does it teach? I want to consider the method of the song. How does it teach that method or message? And then why? Why is there a whole book in the Old Testament dedicated to the topic of marriage? And why is marriage significant? Okay? But before we discover the message of the Song of Songs, we need to do a little bit of homework. What is this book that we know as the Song of Songs? Who wrote it and what kind of song is it? Okay? Now I know I speak fast. So I'll just tell you this. There's this book called A Biblical Theological Introduction to the Old Testament, published by Crossway. I wrote the chapter on the Song of Songs in that book. So this is all there. So what I'm going to do, I'll email it to Karen, that little PDF file, and she can get it to you. So if I go too fast or if you just want to listen for a second, you don't have to just write feverishly, okay? So give you a little break, okay? All right, the Hebrew title for the book of the Song of Songs appears in verse 1. It says, the Song of Songs, which is by Solomon, Shlomo in Hebrew. Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, which is by Solomon. This book is a single song. It's a unified composition. It is the song. Some scholars think it's a collection of various random ancient Near Eastern love literature songs that have just been pasted together. They call it sometimes an erotic psalter or ancient Near Eastern Viagra. We can kind of think of it that way. Okay? That's the first thing. We have to laugh a little bit, right? It's a song. So it's a single song. And number two, it's a superlative song. It's a superlative song, the best song. Like King of Kings or Lord of Lords, meaning the greatest king or the greatest Lord. The Song of Songs is the greatest song, the Song of Songs. Now, if Solomon wrote the book, as verse 1 seems to indicate, then this is an impressive designation because we know that Solomon wrote 1,005 songs according to 1 Kings 4:32, and this, the Bible is telling us, is the best one. That's an impressive designation. Note that Solomon is the only person named in the song 7 total times, including the superscription in verse 1. There are also word plays related to the name of Solomon, and the word Shulamite that appears there just means one who belongs to Solomon. Okay? In addition to Solomon's name, several other features in the song are connected with his person and kingdom. On 5 occasions, a male figure in the song is identified as the king, and the king is specifically identified as Solomon. The song also mentions the king's bed, his chambers, the royal guard, his carriage, his crown, his harem, and his vineyard. Okay. Other connections with Solomon include the chariots of Pharaoh, the Tower of David, and the location of Jerusalem. Additionally, the frequent mention of spices, perfumes, wealth, and flora in the song correspond with Solomon's kingdom and wisdom endeavors, as Dennis read earlier this morning. Solomon was a gifted and prolific author of poetic and wisdom literature. It is recorded that God granted Solomon wisdom to such a degree that he surpassed all who came before him and all who would come after him. 1 Kings 3:28. Solomon applied his wisdom to many different areas of life, but one of those was the production of wisdom literature. Okay? It says here, and again, providentially, Dennis read the same text, but it's good, the Bible, so let's read it again. It says in 1 Kings 4:29 and following, Solomon was wiser than any other man, and his fame spread to all of the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. He described plant life from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He also taught about animals and birds, reptiles and fish. Men of all nations came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all of the kings of the world who had heard his wisdom. The Hebrew word for song used here is the same word that appears in the Song of Songs. Okay, so they're connected. Now, if Solomon is the author, and I think he is, this causes a big problem for us when it comes to the interpretation of the song. How can Solomon write about and present himself as a paradigm for marriage when we know from Scripture that he had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, right? And maidens without number in his training ground, okay? And that these wives led his heart astray and caused him to do that which was evil in the eyes of the Lord by worshiping the gods of his foreign wives. 1 Kings 11. Consider this line in the Song of Songs, gang. Chapter 6, verses 8 through 9. There are 60 queens and 80 concubines and virgins without number. But you are unique, my dove. Well, what a line is that, right? My perfect one, right? Yeah, there's 140 other women I'm related to right now, and I've got a training ground that you would not imagine, but you're unique. Yeah, so he's laying it on thick there. Well, now we're going to return to this question in a moment when it comes to the interpretation of the song. In fact, this kind of a verse like this is one of the keys to understanding the message of the book, right? The Song of Songs, gang, is a poetic wisdom song. It appears in the 3rd section of the Hebrew Bible, which we've already mentioned. And this section in the Old Testament deals with covenant life, okay? That is how to live and think in light of the covenant of grace in the context of common grace that sustains this fallen world in which we now live. It follows, in the Hebrew Bible, Proverbs and Ruth, two other books closely associated with the topic of marriage. So Proverbs 5, Proverbs 7 use the same language as the Song of Songs when talking about marriage, right? Proverbs 31, right, is the accounting of the Eshet Chayil, the woman of strength, the woman of power, right? The only woman in all of the Bible to be called that is Ruth. And she appears right after Proverbs 31. She is the illustration of the exposition in Proverbs 31. Right after that is the Song of Songs, a text written to train young women how to think about marriage. Okay. Biblical wisdom literature teaches God's people how to live in God's world according to God's truth, revealed to us both in creation, general revelation, which we talked about earlier, and Scripture, special revelation. Since wisdom literature reflects on the application of God's truth to life in this world, who is better qualified to instruct us about the reality of marriage than the one who created it? Right? He has the owner's manual, and he's going to tell us how it works. Biblical wisdom literature is rooted in creation, and so it should be of no surprise to us that marriage is such an important topic in wisdom literature, since the creation of the woman and the marriage covenant is the climax of God's very good creation day, number 6. And since the climax of creation is the creation of the woman and the marriage covenant, then it's not surprising that the climax or high point of biblical wisdom literature is get a good spouse. Okay? We'll talk about that later when we talk about why marriage is such an important feature in the Bible and why it's so important in our second lecture, okay? Or really, this is just one large lecture. I'm just dividing it into 2 40-minute sections. How's that? All right, or whenever my time runs out, okay? So here's the message of the Song of Songs. You ready? I'm going to say it several times. So the Song of Songs teaches us that marriage was designed in Genesis chapter 2 by God to be both rock solid in terms of commitment and white hot in terms of intimacy. And a marriage that works to sustain and promote these two components will better be able to endure hardship, resist temptation, and produce actual wholeness, the word there is shalom in Hebrew, in a post-fall Genesis 3 world where now suffering, temptation, and brokenness exist in all of life. That's the message of the Song of Songs. Let me say it again, but shorter. The Song of Songs, gang, teaches us that the covenant of marriage was designed to be rock solid in terms of commitment, white hot in terms of intimacy, and that a marriage that works to hold both of these together as best they can in a post-fall broken world will better be able to endure hardship, resist temptation, and promote wholeness. That's the message of the song. It's great. It's a great message, okay? Now, how does this message get communicated? In all of wisdom literature in the Hebrew Bible, the answer is always in the back, right? You get to the end of Ecclesiastes, oh, that's how you're supposed to do it. You get to the end of Job, oh, that's how it gets worked out, right? Song of Songs, you get to the end, and then you have to read it all again. It provokes you to have to now I got to go read it back and again. That's how it works, okay? So, Song of Songs 8, if you want to turn there. And can I get it to, Eric, can I get it to display, the Song of Songs part? I have some slides. They're not that great. Next one. Okay, there he is. Song of Songs 6, 8 to 10, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, right there. You got it in your Bible. Here we go. This is the didactic or teaching section of the song that gives you the message, all right, at the end. So, and it's the woman who's teaching us. She is the hero of the story, right? She is, the woman here is an Eshet Chayil, a woman of strength figure, according to where it's placed in the canon. Verse 6, here's God's word. Place me like a seal on your heart, like the seal on your arm, for love is strong like death. Its zeal is fierce like the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of Yahweh. Many waters cannot quench this love, and rivers cannot overwhelm it. If a man would give all of the wealth of his house for this love, it would utterly scorn him. We have a younger sister, and she does not have breasts. What shall we do for our sister on the day that she is spoken for? If she is a wall, we will build upon her a battlement of silver. If she is a door, we will build upon her a board of cedar. I am a wall, and my breasts are like the towers. And so in this way, I have become in his eyes like one who both brings forth and finds wholeness or shalom. Now, if I can have the next chart here, I'm going to explain this. Yeah, so this is how I'm correlating the things here, where you have the translation on the left and why I'm saying rock solid, white hot, endures hardship, resists temptation. That's kind of the contextual way of saying it. Like, we use different language today than they did, 3,000 years ago when this was written. And so let's consider the message together. First, the commitment of marriage should be rock solid, which you can see there. Place me like the seal on your heart, like the seal on your arm, for love is strong like death, obstinate like the grave with zeal. In the ancient world, gang, seals were placed on documents and doors, vessels and containers to mark ownership and responsibility and access. Sealing was the means of closing something off from interference, the visible and public sign of authority and ownership. The unsanctioned breaking of a seal was met with punishment, curse, and even death in some contexts. These seals were worn on cords around the arm or the neck. You think of Judah, with the Tamar thing, giving his cord over. And that's why they're saying placed like on your heart or on your arm. Okay? The language of death and the grave also speak to the rock-solid nature of the marriage covenant. These symbols are intended to communicate to us that marriage should be irreversible, permanent, and must not be tampered with by any human person or institution. It's fierce like the grave, strong like death. It shouldn't be reversed. What God has joined together, let no man separate. Okay? The commitment of marriage should be rock solid. Okay? The commitment of marriage should be white hot. That's the second point there you can see here. Its flames are flames of fire, the very flame of Yahweh, the hottest possible flame. Maybe you could translate it that way. And so the text says its flashes really are flashes of fire. The type of heat described here is the heat of intimacy, frequently, the heat of sexual intimacy designed exclusively for the marriage covenant. Okay, this is clear from the vast amount of intimate activity described in the book. There are those twin fawns, the heaps of wheat, the clusters of the vine, and the command in 5:1 to be drunk with lovemaking. There's not a single chapter in the song where physical intimacy is not in some form described. I would give all of my years of training in Hebrew to translate the Song of Songs from the Hebrew text, because all translations are slight interpretations, and so you can smooth some things out. The Hebrew text of the Song of Songs is much spicier than our English translations. Okay? So, the language here used to describe this type of heat is impressive. In Psalm 76, verse 4, the flashes of fire that are mentioned here are the lightning bolts shot from Yahweh's bow. Okay? So Zeus and Cupid have nothing on Yahweh, who is the true God of love, right? Now we know, so think about this lightning. We know that lightning burns at over 50,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Did you know that? That lightning is hot. It's actually 53,540 degrees, okay? If this does not impress you, consider that the surface of the sun only burns at 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Or to put it another way, the heat of intimacy described here should be 9 times hotter than the surface of the sun. Okay? Why would the Bible do something like that? The very next statement supports this understanding of the text. The heat is described as the very flame of Yahweh. Some take this to describe the origin or source of sexual intimacy. This type of heat can only come from the Lord. Some take it to mean the degree of heat. Super hot, the hottest possible heat, or hot up to God. But I don't think we need to distinguish between origin or source and extent, right? In both origin and degree, it's a gift from God. And in the context of sexual intimacy, God makes 2 people into one flesh. This is an amazing, even miraculous thing to think about, that God takes 2 and makes them into one, which is why it's so important in the Genesis 2 account. But there is something more here. When it comes to the fire of the Lord, in the Bible, both the Old and the New Testament, we learn that God himself is the consuming fire. Right? Deuteronomy 4:24, Hebrews 12:29. But note that this fire does not consume his people. but rather it protects them. It is the fire of God's presence, and so his fellowship also. It's the same fire that consumes the enemy, but protects the people. This is how it worked when God protected Israel from Egypt at the Red Sea, or when he sat enthroned in smoke over fire on Sinai. In the same way, the heat of marital intimacy was designed not only to provide wholeness or oneness, but also to protect marriage from the enemy of hardship and temptation. I like to think of it as the way in which God designed it as a furnace, right? When contained within the furnace of the marriage commitment, the fire of sexual intimacy can produce heat well beyond any fire outside of a furnace, right? You put a fire in a furnace in commitment, and it can grow hotter and hotter. If you take it out, it can be destructive or go out. Does that make sense? So you've got to have the commitment and the intimacy together to achieve what God has intended in the marriage covenant. Okay? The marriage covenant was designed to be both rock solid in terms of commitment and white hot in terms of intimacy. This type of love then endures hardship. It says right here, many waters cannot extinguish this love, and rivers cannot flood it. If you want to put out a fire, water will do it, right? But not the flame of Yahweh, right? Think of the flood that consumed the world in Genesis 6-9, or the sea of water that destroyed the army of Egypt in Exodus 14. A marriage that works to sustain rock-solid commitment and white-hot intimacy can better endure hardship in the context of marriage, and that's wisdom literature. And hardship in marriage is not an if, but a when reality, right? Remember how do I say this? Marriage is a difficult thing in a post-Genesis 3 world. What does Paul say in 1 Corinthians 7, I think it's 28? And to the married, right, I want to spare you all these troubles. So he says, stay single. That's his advice. So you have earthly troubles, plural. So, okay. I like the Lord's promise to be with us in the context of marriage. Remember, in Isaiah 43, we have these words, I have called you by name, you are mine. It sounds like a marriage covenant. When you pass through the waters, I'll be with you. And through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you, because you are precious in my eyes and honored, and I love you. A marriage that works to maintain both rock-solid commitment and white-hot intimacy will better endure hardship when it comes. Okay, when it comes. This type of love can resist temptation. If a man were to give all of the wealth of his household, it says it would utterly despise him, right? As the saying goes, you can't buy love. Think of it. Not only would this woman and her family have received a bride price, but she would have lived in the most luxurious accommodations known in the ancient world at the time, with wealth and servants and food and security in the palace of Solomon. This is a serious temptation in the ancient world, right? Think about Solomon was the wisest, the richest, the most powerful man, and you could have lived in his household. It would have been the life of ultimate luxury and ease compared to life in the ancient Near East, right? Hardship and death and servitude, probably very similar to many of the villages in which you work in Africa, right? It was an extreme temptation. The woman experienced real temptation, and we know that similar temptations abound in our culture today. You don't even need to seek them out. Most of them are looking for us now, streaming to us right through the various screens that we inhabit each day. They are constantly trying to convince us that what we have is not enough, and what they have is just what we need. Let me tell you that this is a lie. God has given us all that we need for life and godliness, has he not? The question is, will we believe that it's true, really true, and pursue the very good things that he has provided for us in that context or not? The lie of the world or the truth of wisdom literature. This type of love resists temptation by fully inhabiting the original design of marriage. And this type of love promotes wholeness. The woman says of herself that I am a wall and my breasts are like the towers. So she's a fortified citadel, and she has not been able to be corrupted. Okay? The Hebrew word here is shalom, the wholeness of sexual union described in Genesis 2, one flesh, right? That Jesus makes reference to, that Paul makes reference to, the miracle and the wonder of the one flesh union with body and soul enacted by God himself. The one who brings it, finds it, and the one who finds it, brings it. There's the Hebrew word there, it's motzeh in Hebrew, and it can mean, it's a word that can mean one of two things. She can find peace, or shalom, wholeness, or she can bring it forth. And it's Hebrew poetry, and so it's asking you not to pick one or the other, but it's asking you to think of both at the same time. The one who brings it finds it. Does that make sense? And she is bringing it to her beloved, and so finding it for herself. She is the hero, again, of the story. The Song of Songs teaches us that marriage was designed to be both rock solid and white hot. Rock solid in terms of commitment, and white hot in terms of sexual intimacy. A marriage that works to sustain and promote these two components will better be able to endure hardship, resist temptation, and produce actual wholeness for each person in that marriage relationship. Okay, gang, that's the easy part of the lesson, the message, because it's just slapped right down in chapter 8 for us, right? So regardless of what we think, anything else I'm about to say, that's the pedagogical point, that's the teaching point of the message right there. Now the question becomes this: how does the Song of Songs teach that lesson? How does it lead us into that kind of conclusion? The Song of Songs is perhaps the most difficult book in the Old Testament to interpret on its own. Much like the book of Revelation in the New Testament, both of which are filled with images and figures that can be legitimately interpreted in a number of different ways, right? For example, we understand that the book of Revelation highlights the second coming of Christ, his final victory over sin and death, and the advent of the eschatological new heavens and earth. Great. But the exact nature and timing of the 1,000-year reign or the tribulation or the precise makeup of the 144,000 or who's the Antichrist, the interpretations abound, right? And so too with the Song of Songs. Who is saying what to whom, right? Is it a dream or not? Is that a euphemism for sexual activity or a body part? Is it one song or many? Is it a wedding song, an erotic psalter, or something adapted from a pagan funeral ceremony, which is a popular argument? Time does not permit us to rehearse the myriad of options set forth by interpreters, both ancient and modern, and so I can only set before you the option which seems to make the best sense, right? There's the allegorical interpretations, there's the, and if you just go to any Bible that has all the headings in them, like that are not original, there's editorial headings like the ESV or the NIV, they're trying to interpret it for you, right? And so I just wish they would get rid of those things because they're so misleading. So there we go, we got a representative here. So yeah, be careful, Ben, in your study Bible. Don't put headings in the Song of Songs unless you think you've got it exactly right. So the Song of Songs is the ethical correlate to the book of Proverbs. The Song of Songs is the ethical correlate to the book of Proverbs. But in this instance, written from the perspective of a wise woman. Okay? In Proverbs 1-9, a mother and father are working to teach their son the value of wisdom. In so doing, the parents present two options, Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly. Both allure and both attract, but one leads to life and the other to death. This reality is especially clear in Proverbs 5 and 7, both of which share imagery with the Song of Songs. For example, Proverbs 5:18-19 states, "Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breasts enliven you all the time, and be intoxicated with her love always." Or in Proverbs 7:18-19, Lady Folly entices this way, "Come, let us take our fill of love till morning. Let us delight ourselves with lovemaking, for my husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey, the way of life and the way of death." Likewise, in the Song of Songs, a woman is presented with two options: love in the context of Genesis 2, or love in marriage in the context of 1 Kings 11. That's Solomon's harem. 700 wives, 300 concubines, and virgins without number. I don't know if you know, in the ancient world, the king's harem was divided into two houses, the house of the virgins and the house of the wives and concubines. This was the training camp, and this was the once you were admitted to the team, you could never leave. Okay? There are therefore two men in the song, not just one. There's the beloved shepherd who arrives and departs without access to the harem in Song of Songs 2, verse 8 to 3:5. Can I get that last? I think it's the last, or it's the one with all the outline of the book on it. Let's see. Not that one. There it is, that one. These are the sections right there. 1:2 to 2:7 is the introduction, and then in 2:8 to 3:5 you have that short section. That's where the beloved shepherd comes leaping over the mountains and bounding over the hills, but he can't get into the harem complex. He can only stand outside the wall and call to her through the windows in the lattice. Now, any guy who could leap over mountains and bound over hills could jump the wall, right? But what happens if a male enters into the king's harem? You're immediately executed, right? They had warrior eunuchs all around these things, right, in the ancient world. Okay, so let's see. Yes, okay. There are two men, the beloved shepherd who arrives and departs without access to the harem complex, and then Solomon and his company of warrior eunuchs who are present in the song from 3:6 to 8:4. And they have complete, immediate access to the harem as he arrives in his portable, I call it the love shack from the B-52s, his portable love shack there. The woman in the song has been taken into Solomon's harem in order to prepare to become one of Solomon's concubines, right? Think of this in Song of Songs 3:11. Go out, O daughters of Jerusalem, and daughters of Zion. Daughters of Zion, daughters of Jerusalem. In the Song of Songs, the daughters of Jerusalem are the virgins without number who are being trained for Solomon's harem, okay? And look upon King Solomon with the crown with which his mother crowned him for the day of his wedding, on the day of the gladness of his heart. Okay? Now, I don't know if you know this, but Solomon's mother did not crown him with his crown, when he was coronated or whatever. She's talking, it's a euphemism for he's ready for sexual activity. All right? And all the women are being invited out in the harem to come and view Solomon to become one of his concubines. Okay? That's what's going on there. Or, I read this earlier in Song of Songs 6:8 to 9. There are 60 queens and 80 concubines and virgins without number, but you are unique, my dove, my perfect one. So the context of the song is a woman in the harem complex, right? And so we're not going to hold that particular standard up as the biblical ideal, right? The author is presenting to us a choice between the marriage of Genesis 2 and the marriages of 1 Kings 11, all right? And in Solomon's well-known foibles there. The king's harem had its own set of policies and procedures, some of which we can extrapolate from the experience of Esther, recorded in Esther chapter 2, right? Concubine preparation took, at least in Esther's day, a year. It says 6 months with the oils of myrrh and 6 months with spices and other ointments for women with a special diet. Female attendants to train the virgins for lovemaking, and eunuchs to supervise and protect the harem. This was the policy of Xerxes in Persia. We can only imagine that Solomon's harem was much more elaborate and extravagant. It would have been the life of ultimate luxury, right? 60 queens, 80 concubines, whatever, and virgins without number. They could not count the number of virgins in training there. Does that make sense? Okay. There were two parts to the harem complex, the house of the virgins and the house of the wives, as seen in Esther 2:14. Once you slept with the king, you became a permanent member of the second house, the house of the wives and concubines. However, not all made it to the second house, and this was the only time someone could depart without that departure ending in death. Okay? Here's how it plays out in the Song of Songs. There are 4 parts to the song marked by the famous adjuration, right? Do not arouse or awaken love before it's ready. You're familiar with that particular text? You can see here that it's hard to find the structure of the song if you're not looking for it, but once you see that this adjuration occurs 3 times and marks the 4 sections. That's the style of that thing. And we call it an adjuration, but it's really an oath curse. It's an oath curse. And in Hebrew, it's like this. If you arouse or awaken love before it's ready, may you be cursed. That's what the text says. But in the ancient world, they had something like language taboo. There may be more of that in Africa right now. You just don't say certain things because the word is the power, right? And so in the ancient Hebrew world, you didn't say, may you be cursed. You just left it off. if you arouse or awaken love before it's ready, ... Right? And that's what's happening here. They're leaving off that. So it really says, if you arouse or awaken love, may you be cursed. But they leave that out, so they just say that don't arouse or awaken love. So it's stronger than just saying don't. It's if you do, you're cursed. Does that make sense? Okay. So there are 4 parts to this song, divided up by the adjuration. I just want to tell you, just one of the most important things you can know if you're reading the song is that there's no male figure present in the song until chapter 2, verse 8. And one comes and then one departs. And Solomon does not show up until chapter 3, verse 6. Right? And you can see how the adjuration goes. Every time there's the adjuration, like I adjure you, daughters of Jerusalem, then someone comes. And you can see up there in 2:7, behold, he comes, leaping over the mountains, bounding over the hills. And then in 2:9, or in 3:5, who is this coming up from the wilderness? It's Solomon, the place of testing. And at the end, the woman comes out of the wilderness. Does that make sense? So you've got to track who's there, because it can be confusing in terms of who's talking, right? And if you read like the study Bibles, all the headings, they're saying he says, she says, and it's just like you missed the point. Okay, he's not even there until chapter 3. Okay, so here we go. In 1:1 to 2:7, the first section, and again, I'm just going to get through this, and then we'll pick up later. The harem in 1:1 to 2:4 is collectively called the daughters of Jerusalem. And in this way, they're encouraging the woman regarding the fame of Solomon and the intoxication of his lovemaking skills. The song opens this way: would that he kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your lovemaking will be more intoxicating than wine. Okay? It is here that the woman is first tempted by the so-called benefits of harem life. The woman immediately objects in 1:5 to 7 based upon her appearance that has resulted from prolonged exposure to the sun and manual labor. I am dark but lovely. The harem responds in 1:8 to 17 with the affirmation of the woman's beauty and the allurement of royal jewelry, perfume beautification, and decoration. Once again, the woman responds in 2:1 to 7 by her preference for an exclusive relationship with her beloved shepherd. So we call this the shepherd interpretation sometimes, because he's shepherding among the lilies, or he must go away and graze among the lilies until she can get out. Okay? And it concludes with the statement that she is sick with love, and so places the daughters of Jerusalem under oath not to provoke false love or the love that she does not desire. In section 2, the second section of the song, the woman's true love, the so-called shepherd, arrives in search of the woman in order to return with her. The description of his arrival is one of strength and vitality, leaping over the mountains, bounding over the hills. Upon arrival, the beloved shepherd searches for the woman, but he is prohibited from entering the harem. Such an act would have resulted in quick and certain death. Thus, he can only stand behind the wall, looking through the windows and lattice in 2:9. In 2:10 to 17, the shepherd calls out to the woman. It is now spring, the time for love, and he invites her to return to their vineyard, the place for love. The woman responds in 2:16 to 17 with a vow expressing her rock-solid commitment to the shepherd. My beloved belongs to me, and I belong to him, the one who shepherds among the lilies or the flowers. And then with a command to go and wait until she is able to come out and meet him in 2:17. He can't get in, but she can get out. This section concludes in 3:1 to 4 with the first of 2 dream accounts in the song. These are some of the spiciest parts of the song. These accounts contain some of the most explicit sexual imagery and represent the woman's strong desire to be reunited and joined in marriage to the shepherd, because once she's united to the shepherd, she can no longer become Solomon's concubine. So that she's using her desire to become one flesh with the shepherd to stave off the attacks of Solomon. Okay? The arrival of Solomon, this is what you would call the temptation narrative, runs from 3:6 to 8:4, and it's divided in half at 5:8 with a secondary adjuration in the form of a question. If you do not arouse or awaken, it says right here, I put you under oath, daughters of Jerusalem. If you find my beloved, what will you say to him? Tell him I'm sick with love. Okay, love sickness, which is a common theme in ancient Near Eastern love literature, the sick love. Like I will feign sickness, and all the doctors will come, and none of them will be able to heal me, but when you come, I'll be well immediately. That's Egyptian love literature, Akkadian love literature, all that kind of business. It runs around. The third section of the song is the longest, and In the first subsection, Solomon arrives in all of his kingly glory. He appears in a billow of perfume and incense, accompanied by his royal bed and surrounded by his palace warriors, likely harem eunuchs. It says in the text, and it's like 60 warriors, all with their hands on the sword, are all grasping their sword. That's not what the Hebrew text says. It's 60 warriors, all who have been seized by the sword. They're eunuchs. You do not take 60 warriors into your harem. Does that make sense? The only kind of men who are getting into there are the warrior eunuchs. And it says that's what they are right there, euphemistically. They've all been seized by the sword. Does that make sense? So, let's see. The virgins are assembled for selection in 3:11, and Solomon works to woo the woman by way of flattery and promises great love and lovemaking. The temptation of Solomon is followed by a second dream account in 5:2-7, once again expressing the woman's profound longing for her shepherd. Like the previous dream account, this one's also filled with explicit sexual imagery describing the woman's covenantal union. The second subsection begins with the daughters of Jerusalem inquiring of the woman. They want to know why her beloved shepherd is better than any other man, especially Solomon. The woman responds by describing the shepherd to the daughters of Jerusalem. The woman's answer provokes a second question. And where has your beloved gone? Why isn't he here, O beautiful one among the women? Where has your beloved turned that we may search for him with you? The woman answers and also affirms her commitments to the shepherd by repeating her statement of covenant loyalty. I belong to my beloved, and my beloved belongs to me. This is like the covenant formula. I will be your God, and you will be my people, and I will dwell in your midst. It's the same grammatical construction here that exists in that. So I call it the covenantal formula of marriage. Following this vow of loyalty, Solomon sets out to woo the young woman a second time. The woman refuses and desires to leave harem life. The daughters of Jerusalem join with Solomon to call the woman back, where they say, return, return. She has now created conflict in the harem among the virgins, a conflict described in 7:1 as the dance of two armies. Next, Solomon delivers his third and final attempt at wooing the young woman to become part of the harem as a concubine, but it does not work. She responds to the king, I belong to my beloved, and his desire is for me. The rejection of Solomon is followed by the woman's invitation or call to the shepherd to return in order that they may depart together and be united in the covenant of marriage. The final section in 8:15-14, we read most of that section. This final section constitutes the climax of the song. In this section, the woman who is the hero of the song arrives with her beloved shepherd, coming up from the wilderness, the place of testing in the Bible. The woman teaches that true love, the love of marriage described in Genesis 2:18-25, must exhibit rock-solid commitment and white-hot intimacy in order to endure hardship and resist temptation, and that this type of marriage can produce wholeness. As such, the woman rejects Solomon and harem life with the temptation of wealth, luxury, ease, and prestige. The song concludes with an invitation to the beloved and those friends who would embrace her wisdom to come away from the folly and temptation of harem life or any other perversion of biblical marriage in order to experience the true love of biblical wisdom. Consider with me, in conclusion, the rejection of Solomon here in chapter 8, verses 11-12. Solomon had a vineyard at Baal Hamon. He let out the vineyard to keepers. Each one was to bring for its fruit 1,000 pieces of silver. My vineyard, my very own, is still before me. You, O Solomon, may have the 1,000, and the keepers of the fruit the 200. In verse 11, gang, we read that Solomon had a vineyard in Baal Hamon. To date, we do not know of any such location in ancient Israel. Why? There is no such place. All right? The Hebrew expression Baal Hamon is easily translated by my first-year Hebrew students is husband of a multitude. Solomon had a vineyard. He was the husband of a multitude. And I have my own vineyard, and it's still mine. Keep your vineyard, Solomon. Mine is still before me. Let's see here. I just skipped all that. The woman's vineyard represents her body, as is made clear to us in Song of Songs 1. All the stuff that happened in Song of Songs 1 gets picked up again in Song of Songs 8. And she has kept her vineyard for her beloved and rejected life in Solomon's vineyard. The vineyard keepers and those who bring its fruit are the well-known harem attendants. those who supervise the care of the woman and protect the king's so-called property. The woman of the song is indeed the hero of the song. She has resisted the temptation of Solomon and his harem and set forth the lesson of faithfulness to the ideal of Genesis 2 for the next generation, as characterized by her younger sister in this same chapter. So she's the teacher, and this is how we're to teach it. We have a little sister, and she has no breasts. Just means she's not sexually mature yet. What shall we do for our sister on the day when she is spoken of? If she is a wall, we will build upon her a battlement of silver. But if she is a door, we will enclose her of boards of cedar. That is, we will fortify her with this instruction so she can make the wise decision as well. The Song of Songs, gang, teaches that the covenant of marriage was designed to be rock solid in terms of commitment and white hot in terms of intimacy. This type of relationship was designed to endure hardship, resist temptation, and promote wholeness in the context of Genesis 2 as the ideal of an exclusive one-flesh marriage covenant. This is the wisdom of the song. All right. This afternoon, we'll step back and we'll ask the question, why would the Bible have a whole book dedicated to the topic of marriage like this? Right? Why is marriage so important? And what's its role in creation and in consummation? That kind of reason. So we'll talk about that to kind of fortify our instruction here, if you can think about it. We'll build a battlement of silver around our instruction. All right? So thank you very much for your attention. You guys are great.